Howdy folks, welcome to Module 2 of Security Plus. Today's module is called Comparing Threat Types, and today we'll be diving a bit deeper into security. The objectives we'll be covering in today's module are two. The first of which is compare and contrast attributes and motivations of threat actor types. The second objective is explain common threat vectors and attack surfaces. Today's module consists of three main sections we'll be covering. The first of which is threat actors. The second main section will be attack surface. And the last section we'll be diving in today is social engineering. Alrighty folks, before we jump into this module, show the channel some love and give this video a like. It does help both the video and the channel out when you do so. And of course, if you'd like to know when module 3 of this course goes live, then maybe also consider subscribing. Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's dive into module 2 of Security Plus. Alright folks, let's start with that first main section, which was called threat actors. The first topic we've got up in this section is vulnerability, threat, and risk. So we're going to be covering each of these individually. Alright folks, I'm going to start you guys nice and slow. So something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about vulnerability, threat, and risk is vulnerability plus threat actually equals risk. So for that to make sense, we're probably going to have to dive a little bit deeper into each of these individually. So starting with vulnerability, what is that? That is generally some sort of weakness in your company or the company of your client. So vulnerability is a weakness that could be triggered accidentally or exploited intentionally to cause a security breach. So this is not necessarily related to just IT folks. This actually extends well beyond the borders of just IT. So this can be anything in real life. So if there's some sort of vulnerability in a company, whether it be an IT company or not, somebody or something, it's normally somebody, can go and exploit that, basically abuse that vulnerability, and they can potentially gain access to something or go and break something or just in general do something not so nice. So it's a weakness of sorts is what it is. So if you don't have a lot of security in your company, that's a vulnerability. If you, for example, don't have an antivirus on your machines or an antivirus that's up to date, that's a vulnerability. If you've got a firewall, but it's not a very good firewall, that's a vulnerability. Or if that firewall is turned off or some of the ports are open on that firewall, that's a vulnerability. Someone or something can take advantage of that weakness and they can go and exploit it to, well, do something not so nice. As for threat, this is the potential for someone or something to exploit a vulnerability and breach the security. So basically, what are the chances of someone or something actually doing that? So we already know what a vulnerability is. It's a weakness of some sort. A threat is basically statistically, wow, I can't say that 3 times fast. It's basically statistically, the chances of that actually happening in a company. So what are the chances of somebody exploiting that weakness? So as long as it's there, it's a threat. So if you have your firewall turned off, it doesn't mean something will happen, but as long as it is off, it's a vulnerability and it's also considered a threat. Because at any point in time, it could be right now, could be tomorrow, it could only be in a month or a year from now, but at any point in time, someone or something could potentially go and take advantage of that. So a threat is just, what are the odds of this actually happening? What are the odds of someone or something taking advantage of that known weakness in your company or your client's company? So we know vulnerability plus threat equals risk. So what is risk? Risk is the level of hazard posed by vulnerabilities and threats. So let's say we do have a weakness in our company. And let's say the chances of someone exploiting this is actually very high. Now, if someone does, theoretically go and exploit this weakness of mine or yours or whatever it might be, what is the risk to the company, hazard-wise? Is it the situation of I'm just going to shrug my shoulders and be like, tough bananas? Or is it a very serious situation? So what is the risk to you, your company, or your client's company if someone were to actually go and exploit this vulnerability? What are the risks to you and your company? What is the hazard? What hazard does it pose to you or the company? Is it a very big hazard in the sense of it can cause you or your company financial loss? Can it cause you damage? Maybe your backups are going to kick the bucket, or some sort of server is going to kick the bucket, or you're going to lose data. What is the risk should this vulnerability be exploited? If the risk is minimal, then you'll see people are normally not that inclined to go and patch this vulnerability, or at least they're not in a rush to do so. But if the risk is quite high, if someone were to go and exploit this, then normally you'll find that someone or something will go and patch this hole very quickly. So to give you an example, let's say Microsoft Windows has got a massive vulnerability that's just been discovered in their new operating system being Windows 11. It's a brand spanking new vulnerability that somebody has just discovered. Now, as long as that hole is in the operating system, let's just call it a hole, a vulnerability. As long as it's there, it's a threat because someone out there could potentially discover it and take advantage of that. Now, what risk does that pose to the users? Can the hacker or the perpetrator go and take control of their machine? Will they be able to see data, potentially financial data? Or is the risk minor, just going to be able to fiddle with some of your settings and stuff? So what exactly is the risk to you or the user should someone discover this vulnerability and actually go and exploit it? All right, let's move on to the second topic, attributes of threat actors. Now guys, unfortunately, the threats these days are not as simple as they used to be many moons ago. So with that being said, known threats versus adversary behaviors. In the old days, to find a perpetrator or some form of malware in a company environment was quite easy peasy. Or maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but it was a lot easier than compared to these days. In the old days, we would basically just be scanning for viruses, Trojan horses, maybe ransomware. It wasn't quite that popular back in the day. And everything was quite simple. All threats were quite simple. We would basically be looking for known signatures, if I have to put it in simple terms. Nowadays, the whole threat landscape has completely changed. The whole hacking world and cybersecurity world has been thrown upside down. These perpetrators have gotten so creative these days that we can't just use your conventional antivirus and anti-spyware to locate these threats. I mean, yes, you should still have these security softwares on your machines and your environment, but that alone is not enough. You'll find a lot of platforms these days like Microsoft 365 and Microsoft's Azure platform. A lot of these platforms have got sophisticated software and monitoring tools built into them. These tools don't just scan for your traditional signatures and things like that. No, they look for behavior, something out of the ordinary. For example, I'm going to put this in simple terms for you guys. If your user suddenly starts signing in irregular hours, that is something weird, right? Or if one of your users suddenly starts signing in from a new device or potentially a new location, all of these are suspicious. It doesn't mean it is something suspicious. Maybe this user is really legitimately just signing in from someplace new. Maybe they've been doing a bit of traveling, but you never know. Rather a false positive than not detecting it at all or not knowing about it at all. That is very risky. So if something like that pops up, you or somebody from your security team can go and investigate and just check it out. And if you see, oh, hang on a moment, this doesn't look like our user, then you can obviously go and do something about it. If you're not sure, you can go and contact this user in question, phone them if need be, maybe contact them on WhatsApp or something and say, hey, listen, bro, did you by any chance just sign in 5 minutes ago from a new location, a new device? And if they say yes, then you know, confirmed. You can ignore it. But if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, bro, then that is a red flag and you need to immediately jump on this. So yes, folks, known threats versus adversary behaviors. The whole landscape has completely changed, and the way we scan for this it's quite tricky. You are going to have to execute a certain level of skill here, and you're going to have to make use of more sophisticated software now, like looking at behaviors. Things that basically stand out, anything that looks suspicious. Now, as for these threats, they can either be internal or they can be external. Now, you can probably guess if a threat is internal that it's more likely going to be someone that actually works for your company. Now, believe it or not, internal threats are not limited to your own internal employees. This could potentially be a contractor, consultant that's been granted temporary access, perhaps. It could be a business partner. You never know. These days, you really never know. But to be honest, it's more than likely going to be an internal employee, a current employee, or somebody that has just left the organization. Now, these internal threats have authorized access already. So, this internal employee, if they currently work for you or this client's company, they most likely have some level of access. You can imagine that's a bit scary. So, the question here is, what level of access does the employee have? That's one of the reasons why it is so important to always use the concept of least privilege, something we'll talk about again later in this course. It's not just your employees, it's for yourself as well. So it's in the event of somebody's account getting compromised or someone going off the rails, they're just going rogue, like this case here. So if you've got an internal threat, which happens to be maybe an internal employee, and if you applied the concept of least privilege, yes, they might potentially be able to do some damage, and they might potentially be able to see some stuff they're not supposed to. But we can effectively limit what they can see and do, and we can, just control the damage. It's a form of damage control. So these internal threats, generally, yes, they either have authorized access or very recently had authorized access. Something else to know about these internal threats, guys, is they are not necessarily people that's actually physically inside the building. The threat could potentially be coming from outside the building. So, yeah, before we jump onto that, external threats, what is that? That is generally someone outside the company. They don't necessarily work for your company. They most likely don't have any access yet, so they're going to have to go through all your security. They're going to have to go through your firewall and anything else you or your client's company may or may not have implemented at this company. So generally, it is a lot harder to do whatever you need to do if this is an external threat. So if you are, let's say, a hacker of sorts, and you are coming in from the outside as an external person, then yes, generally speaking, it's going to be a lot harder. Internal threats, they've got a lot easier. They're already behind your firewall. They're already inside your network, and they tend to want to already have a certain level of access. So internal threats are actually a little bit more risky if you think about it. If you look at external threats, it does not necessarily mean that if the attack comes from inside the building, that's an internal threat. It's still an external threat because it originates from externally. The person might be sitting at home and they might be executing this attack remotely via some sort of remote tool. So if I'm sitting at home and I use some form of remote tool to attack you remotely, inside your company, that is not necessarily an internal threat or attack. It's an external attack because I myself am still sitting technically outside the company. As for the level of sophistication and capability, now that, guys, has obviously gone up a lot over the years. Attacks have gotten way more complicated these days, and obviously there's a much higher need for way more sophisticated tools from our side to go and protect ourselves against these threats. Tools-wise, monitoring tools-wise, all that kinds of stuff. And also in general, you guys are going to have a lot more skill these days because the evil guys, the bad guys, are going to obviously have a lot more skills as well. So the more skills they learn, the more skills you're going to have to learn. The more creative they get, the more creative you're going to have to get, unfortunately. Now, you get some people that have got low capabilities. We call those low capability actors, which rely on commodity tools. So these are, for lack of a better description, let's just call them wannabe hackers. They want to be hackers, but they're not really hackers. They know something about something, enough to cause some sort of shenanigans on your environment, but they're not really truly skilled. Obviously, they differ in the level of experience that some of these guys got. Some of them might have a little bit more experience than others, but in general, they don't have a lot of experience. They're most likely going to have to go and download some sort of tool or multiple tools online to do whatever it is they want to go and do. A real perpetrator, a real hacker, which we call a high capability hacker, they don't necessarily need some fancy tool they can go and download. They can make their own tools. They can go and create or develop new ways to get into your company or someone's environment for that matter. So we call these high capability actors. And these folks can obviously go and develop new attacks. They can go and develop their own tools, which are new tools. So they might use tools, they might not use tools. But the point here is these guys have got a lot of skills. And then you get those guys that have got a high level of access. These folks might potentially be very high up in politics or in military, and they could potentially go and make use of political or military assets to go and do some sort of hacking. So they might potentially be in politics, they might potentially be in military, or they might just have access to resources in politics or military. Something else you guys need to know about when it comes to these threat actors. A low capability actor is probably a sole actor. Usually these wannabe hackers are alone. Very rarely will they act in groups. But the high capability actors are very often going to be working in groups. These are generally organized groups. They'll have maybe a coder or two. They'll have a couple of guys that work on social engineering. They'll have a couple of guys that do phishing. They'll have a couple of guys that does this and that. It's a very organized group normally. In these groups, they need resources and funding. So in terms of resources, one of the things that counts as resources is obviously the different kinds of people they've got in the group. Each of them is a different resource. But the resources can also be resources they're getting from some sort of party. This may or may not be a political party. It may or may not be a military of some kind, or even a whole state or a country in some cases. There are some evil groups out there, guys, that are actually funded by governments, states, or just the military in general, or political parties in general. Yes, you get those. So believe it or not, there are political parties out there in some countries that will hire a bad group like this. It consists of various kinds of hackers. Some of them do phishing, some do social engineering, some do this, some do that. So these groups are funded sometimes by political parties, state-owned parties, or just whole freaking countries in some cases. You never know, especially in times of war. Alright, and with that, we can move on to the next section. Motivations of threat actors. In other words, why are these bad guys, let's call them black hat hackers, why are they doing what they're doing? Now, there can be many reasons why they do this nonsense, guys. That would be the intent or motivation. So sometimes when these folks that do this nonsense, sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's on purpose. In other words, folks, it can be malicious. It can be maliciously targeted, or it can be opportunistic. So sometimes people, they just got lucky. They saw an opportunity. They did not really intend on doing what they were about to do, but since they saw the opportunity, they just grabbed it, and that's why they ended up doing that crime. But most of the time, from my experience, I can tell you it's going to be malicious in nature. Someone maliciously targeted this target, whatever it might be. It was planned, and in the day, it was not opportunistic. As for the intent behind it, for these hackers and perpetrators, it can be for many reasons, guys. It can be for something as simple as greed. Greed is a very common reason for a lot of perpetrators. It can be curiosity. Yeah, curiosity is a thing. Sometimes people hack stuff literally just because they were curious. There's maybe something they wanted to see, something they wanted to know. And some of these hackers have gone so far as to hack stuff purely out of curiosity. It's not always greed. Greed, that's normally financial gain. Curiosity, that's also a very good motivation force for a lot of people. And then the last one, which is also a very good motivation force for hackers, is revenge. So someone happens to have a lot of skills when it comes to cybersecurity, and somebody else did something not so nice to this first someone. Yeah, they might put those skills to some bad use. I suppose what we're saying here is never cheese off a hacker or a black hat hacker, because they might use those skills to, well, get back at you, I suppose. Now, sometimes when people do get into stuff, it might not necessarily be on purpose. So we spoke about maliciously targeted, which means it was planned, it was on purpose. Opportunistic is still, well, they still kind of went with their free will. They did this on purpose. It might not have been planned, but they saw an opportunity and they went for it. Then you get cases which are very rare where it might be accidental, believe it or not, unintentional. There has been some rare cases noted where somebody would actually get into something purely accidental. It has happened. It's very rare, especially in very tight security environments. But sometimes people see or do stuff purely accidental. It was unintentional, was not their intention to break into something. They did something and they noticed, oh shucks, I just caught past this security mechanism. Oopsie daisy. So at the end of the day, folks, it was never really their intention. As for the strategies of these perpetrators, these black hat hackers, why do they do this? Or should I say, how do they plan on going about this? So their strategies could be very well be to do something as simple as service disruption. So in other words, prevent an organization from working as it normally does. This could potentially involve an attack on their website, or maybe using malware to block access to servers and employee workstations. Service disruption can be an end in itself if the threat actor's motivation is to sow chaos or gain revenge, guys. So sometimes the perpetrator will literally go and do what they do because they want to get revenge on this company. Maybe they're an ex-employee. They potentially did not get that promotion they were hoping for, that increase or that bonus they were hoping for. And now they may not even work for this company anymore for all we know. And their end goal here, their strategy is to get revenge on this company. They want to sow chaos. They want to make chaos. Some people just like chaos. There might not even really be a good reason behind it. They just like chaos, especially in the old days. A couple of years back, I think actually more than 10 years back, 20, 30 years back, a lot of hackers did what they did, not for any real financial gain or because of revenge. They just liked chaos. So at the end of the day, if they could hear their name on the news, that's all they wanted to achieve, was to get their name out there. So it was kind of like a game of sorts at times when they wanted to see if they can get their name out there. So it was all about getting your name out there. Nowadays, however, that has kind of gone down. It's simmered down. So now it's more about other things like financial gain. So in other words, greed, maybe because of curiosity, like we said earlier, or just plain out revenge. So if service disruption is generally because of revenge. Other times, the perpetrator strategy might be something like data exfiltration. In other words, they want to get some sort of data out of you, your company, or your client's company. So this is a transfer or a copy of some type of valuable information from a computer, potentially a network, and this is normally without authorization. And the threat actor, being this perpetrator, they might perform this type of theft because they want the data asset for themselves, because they can exploit its loss as blackmail, or they can potentially go and sell this to a third party, so the highest bidder, as some people might say. And then the third one I'm going to give you guys in terms of strategy for these bad actors is to falsify some type of trusted resource. We call this disinformation. So this could be things like changing the content of a website. Maybe there was legitimate information on a website and now they go and change some of this information to false information, misleading the public for whatever gain. This could potentially be to go and manipulate search engines to inject fake sites. Yes, that's a thing, folks. Or, believe it or not, using bots to post false information on social media websites. This is actually very popular. You'll see this on TikTok, you'll see this on Facebook and Twitter, which I believe they call X nowadays. I think X and Facebook is probably the two main ones, and probably a little bit of Instagram as well. There's a lot of information out there, folks, which is fake. So if you see something online, this is very common knowledge. If you see something, don't believe the first thing you see. Verify it from a trusted source. So if you go and watch a video on TikTok and you see, oh, wow, I didn't know this happened, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, folks. The same could be said about Facebook. If you see a video on Facebook or you read something there, or the same on Instagram or the same on X, it does not necessarily mean it's true. There's obviously a lot of false information out there that's being spread by malicious people for malicious reasons. This is normally to gain something out of this. This could be a political party. This could be a government. This could be just someone that's got it out for someone else, maybe a company or an individual. So always verify information you see with a trusted known source. Now, the motivations for these bad apples, that can sometimes be chaotic, motivations. I did kind of touch on this earlier indirectly. So in the early days of the internet, like I said earlier, many service disruption and disinformation attacks were perpetrated with the simple goal of causing chaos, guys. Hackers might deface websites or release worms that brought corporate networks to a standstill for no other reason than to gain credit for the hack. Yes, literally just to gain credit for the hack. They just wanted their name out there. And if you guys have ever watched a good action episode or a good action movie where there's maybe like some sort of serial killer or something in these movies, or these episodes, you'll find that if the police catches this perpetrator, they will normally not say that they've caught them, and they will especially not mention the person's name, because very often why they did what they did was just to get their name out there. They like seeing their name on the news, these people. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. So, yeah, with that in mind, the same could be said about these bad actors. These bad actors, sometimes they cause chaos purely just because they want to gain credit for the hack. They've got some sort of hacker name. It might be an individual hacker name. It might be a hacker group, but they want to gain credit for the hack. They want to get well known. That is an example of a chaotic motivation. The motivation might obviously be financial as well, which is probably one of the main ones for a lot of people, not just bad actors. So as hacking and malware became both more sophisticated and better commodified, the opportunities to use them for financial gain grew quickly over the years. So if an attacker is able to steal data, they might be able to sell it to other parties. Alternatively, they might use an attack to threaten the victim with blackmail or extortion, or to perpetrate fraud. So, yeah, if you don't know with regard to blackmail, blackmail is demanding payment to prevent the release of information. So normally it would get some sort of sensitive information about a company or a person, and they would use that information to blackmail a person or a company for, well, financial gain. Extortion, sometimes for the same reason. So extortion is demanding payment to prevent or halt some type of attack. So maybe they've got information about your company. This is especially the case of ransomware. You'll find lots of cases of ransomware, if you guys know what that is. They will get a hold of some sort of sensitive information, and they'll demand that this company, normally the government or some well-known company, they will demand for them to pay some sort of amount, failing which they will go and release certain sensitive information about their customers or the users. So it's a form of extortion. And then fraud, guys, fraud, you get so many kinds of fraud, but in this sense, fraud is falsifying things like records. Internal fraud might involve tampering of accounts to embezzle funds, or investing customer details to launder money, that kinds of stuff. And then the last motivation I'm going to give you guys for today on this specific topic is political motivations. So political motivation, or that can be a lot of things, guys. I mean, you get subcategories of this, for crying out loud. So political motivation means that the threat actor, in other words, this black hat hacker, uses an attack to bring about some type of change in society or governance. This can cover a very wide range of motivations, guys. For example, this can be an employee acting as a whistleblower because of some ethical concern about an organization's behavior, perhaps. This could be a campaign group disrupting the services of an organization that they believe acts in contradiction to their ethical or philosophical beliefs. This could be a nation state, maybe, using service disruption, data exfiltration, or disinformation against government organizations or companies in another state in pursuit of war aims. So this could be because these political parties, I don't know, they want to do something in terms of war. Maybe they are fighting against other political parties, because you know how politics is, guys. Politics, these guys get crazy sometimes. All we see is the face they put on the TV. You know, they'll put up a front for us because they want our votes. But sometimes what goes on behind the scenes, yeah, folks, sometimes it'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up if you know what these parties do in the background, in the shadows. Alright, folks, let's move on to hackers and hacktivists. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I'm going to start you guys off by explaining what a hacker is, or should I say, the lone hacker. Now, the term hacker describes an individual who has the skills to gain access to computer systems through unauthorized or unapproved means. That part I'm sure you guys already know, because everybody knows what a hacker is, even if you're not in IT. Now, what you might not know, though, is originally hacker was a neutral term for a user who excelled at computer programming and computer systems administration. So it was basically just someone that was very skilled in IT. You know, this person was pretty clued up when it came to programming and systems administration. So if you were very clued up in computers back in the day, we would have called you a hacker, but it did not necessarily mean you were up to no good. So many, many moons ago, a hacker was just someone very good with computers. Nowadays, not so much. The term has kind of changed. Its meaning has somewhat changed. Now, many moons ago, hacking into a system was actually a sign of technical skill and creativity. Now, that has gradually become associated with illegal or malicious system intrusions, unfortunately. The terms unauthorized, which was previously known as black hat, and authorized, which was previously known as white hat, are used to distinguish these motivations. A white hat hacker always seeks authorization to perform penetration testing of private and proprietary systems, guys. So just to quickly summarize what I just said, a white hat hacker is authorized. He, she has permission to do what it is they want to go and do. An unauthorized person is a black hat hacker. So a black hat hacker these days, they are a bad actor and they're unauthorized. They normally do not have permission to access the information that they're accessing or to do whatever it is they're trying to do. A white hat hacker, they are authorized and they generally do have permission to do whatever it is they're up to. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to unskilled attackers. Now, what is an unskilled attacker? I think the name speaks for itself, wouldn't you guys say? Now, folks, an unskilled attacker is someone who uses hacker tools without necessarily understanding how they work or having the ability to craft new attacks. Unskilled attacks might have no specific target or any reasonable goal other than gaining attention or proving technical abilities. So in a nutshell, what happens here is these unskilled attackers, they're wannabe hackers. They want to say, hey, look at me, I'm a hacker, I can do this, I can do that. Meanwhile, they don't really know jack squat. They don't actually know what they're doing. They probably went online, which actually might be a Trojan horse, which means they're malicious to the person themselves now, actually. So a lot of these tools, which are supposedly hacker tools, they've got Trojan horses in them. That's the funny thing. So this wannabe hacker is now going to try and do some sort of hacking. And the tool might actually work to a certain degree, but what this hacker doesn't know is that tool is a Trojan horse, and it's actually infecting his own machine and is doing something bad on his own machine. But anyway, guys, so yeah, unskilled attackers, generally these people just want attention. A true blue hacker that actually does have the skills, they don't need fancy tools, and they don't normally care about attention. The people who want attention that says, hey, look at me, I'm a hacker, they're normally ones that don't really have any skills. They either have no skills or they have very little skills. And these people normally rely on some sort of tools they have to go and download online, and somebody has to guide them, that kinds of stuff. And then, folks, you get hacker teams and hacktivists. So this is pretty much the exact opposite of a lone hacker, I suppose. So a lone hacker is one individual. He or she might be skilled, they might not be skilled. But a hacker team, they normally are quite skilled because they're obviously going to go and look for more people that's got equal skill. If I am a hacker of some kind, theoretically, I'm not just going to go and associate myself with just any other weasel. No, I'm going to go look for other people that's got equal skills than me or better, or skills that I don't have. That's the whole idea about these hacker teams is some of these guys have got the exact same amount of skills. Some of them have got different skills. So generally they're going to go and look for people that's got different sets of skills so that they can obviously go and break into more stuff and all that. Now what you guys might not know is historically the image of a hacker is that of a loner. So many moons ago hackers were generally alone, but nowadays not necessarily. So these hackers would normally act as an individual with very few resources and little to no funding at all. Now folks, while this lone hacker, which is an individual, while they still remain a threat till this day, which we should probably still account for, these guys are not really people we have to worry about as much, at least not as much as when it comes to a team or a group of hackers. It's actually these days way more common to find these hackers to work in a group or a team of sorts. That's generally the more common scenario these days. So the collaborative team effort means that these threat actors, that's the proper name these days, they're able to develop sophisticated tools and novel strategies. Remember, a true blue hacker doesn't need to go and download tools. They can go and make their own little tools, or they can go and make their own little weaknesses in a platform of some kind. So they don't need to go and download stuff. And if it's a team, then obviously they're going to get this done a lot quicker and a lot easier. Now, if you guys don't know what a hacktivist group is, a good example would be something like Anonymous. The group called Anonymous. I don't just mean, hey, I'm anonymous. No, I mean there's a hacker group called Anonymous. They're probably one of the most well-known ones out there. You normally see them wearing these white masks. If they happen to appear in some sort of video, they'll wear some sort of white mask. And over the years, there's obviously been a lot of people that's been trying to copycat them. They'll pretend to be part of Anonymous, but meanwhile they're not. So there's lots and lots of hacktivist groups out there. Some of them are very well known, like Anonymous. Some of them are less known. And some of them care about their public image. It's all about the credit at the end of the day for them, where other ones don't really care. They'll work silent in the background, and only really the hacker community will know who they really are and what they're capable of. So a hacktivist group such as Anonymous or WikiLeaks or LulzSec, they use cyber weapons to promote a political agenda in most cases. Not always, but generally that's the case. Hacktivist groups might attempt to use data exfiltration to obtain and release confidential information to the public domain. This could be maybe performing service disruption attacks or deface websites to spread disinformation, like we said earlier. Now, political, media, and financial groups and companies are usually most at risk of becoming a target for hacktivists. But environmental and animal advocacy groups may target companies in a wide range of industries. So I suppose, well, it depends on what kind of industry they're in. But generally, if you are in media, politics, or financial, you're probably going to have the biggest target on your back. If you're not one of those industries, then you should be okay for the most part. So, yeah, I suppose if you're in media, political, or financial, make sure you're a good boy. As long as you're a good boy, they should, for the most part, leave you alone. I've seen a lot of these hacktivist groups will not necessarily target just any random media outlet or political party. It's normally the ones that are corrupt, that did something bad. Now, yes, some of these activist groups have got chaotic end goals, so they don't really care whether you're innocent or not. But a lot of them I've seen don't necessarily have chaotic end goals or chaotic strategies in mind. For them, it's about, I don't know, justice, I suppose. So if someone's been a naughty boy, they want justice and they're going to serve it themselves. Alright, once again, moving on to the next topic here, nation state actors and advanced persistent threats. If you guys don't know what a nation state actor is, well, we already know what an actor is. An actor is basically just another fancy name for a hacker, if we have to put this in simple terms. Now, nation state actors are, let's call these hackers that work for the state. They work for the government. They potentially maybe work for some very well-known political party, something along those lines. It's not just some lone hacker or some random hacker group. No. This group of hackers, they are normally employed by the government. Some government, this could be one country, it could be the next country. The point is, they actually work for a state or a government of some kind. And generally you'll find that these people will not say that they are working for a government because they work at an arm's length. They want plausible deniability. So very often when countries don't like one another or if they've got beef with one another, you'll find that these countries like to go and use what we call nation-state actors. A lot of countries use these because it gives them plausible deniability. Now, generally, you'll find that during times of war, countries very often make use of this, especially countries that are not directly involved. They don't want to be directly involved, but they'll still kind of go and stick their fingers in where it doesn't belong. And in those times, it's actually very common to find those countries, which we sometimes refer to as states, to go and use what we call nation-state actors. So these are people with a very high level of cybersecurity skills, and these people obviously act in the shadows in the background, and they'll go and do all kinds of nonsense. So in short, we can say that these nation-state actors are attached to military or secret services. It's not just some random hacker group or hacktivists, as some folks call them. No, these are normally attached to a state, more specifically military or secret services. You'll find that these folks generally have a very high level of capability. I mean, if they're going to be working for the state, it's not just going to be some random wannabe hacker. No. These folks generally have a very high level of capability. They're very clued up, and they don't normally act alone. Normally, it's a whole group of people acting as one. Now, folks, most nation states have actually developed cybersecurity expertise and will use cyber weapons to achieve military and commercial goals. A lot of countries and states have been doing it these days, and it's actually becoming more and more common, unfortunately. Now, the term advanced persistent threat, which you see there in the title, we call that APT for short, that was coined to understand the behavior underpinning modern types of cyber adversaries. Who knew? Rather than thinking in terms of systems being infected with a virus or Trojan, like in the old days, an APT, in other words, advanced persistent threat, that refers to the ability of an adversary to achieve ongoing compromise of network security. This is generally to go and obtain and maintain access, and this can be done obviously using a variety of tools and techniques. So it's not just your traditional virus or Trojan horse. This can be something potentially like a ransomware. This can be something potentially in your hard drive's root. It can be a lot of things like that, guys. So it's kind of like a backdoor in some cases. So there is a threat, but this threat is not just a once-off threat. It's an ongoing threat. These perpetrators, these actors as we call them, they've got a backdoor of sorts, which gives them continuous access to whatever it is they're up to. So that is not something we want. That is very bad, as you can imagine. So if you are not one of these actors, and one of these actors are obviously acting against your company or one of your clients' companies, that is absolutely not a situation you want to find yourself in. Because how do you cut these people off? So one of the tools we like to go and use is obviously a very good firewall, but that's only as good as the person implementing it. So you need to get yourself a very good firewall. They're not cheap. So if you get yourself one of those proper physical firewalls, they don't come cheap. They come with all kinds of fancy features and functions and stuff. But it's not really going to help you much if you don't know what they are and how to go and use them and how to go and implement them. It's obviously also wise to go and use all kinds of other monitoring software that allows you to keep an eye on your environment. So as soon as something stands out, you need to know about it immediately. Or at least your security team needs to know about it immediately. Now, folks, nation state actors, they've unfortunately been implicated in many attacks over the years, particularly on energy, health, electoral systems. So, when it's time to vote and all that, this applies in all countries, by the way. I'm not referring to any specific country. People love to go and tamper with votes. So, they'll go and hack some sort of system, try and influence the votes. They'll go and hack energy companies or something related to energy, something related to health. The goals of state actors are primarily disinformation and often espionage. So this is normally for some sort of strategic advantage of such. There's a couple of countries that are very well known for doing this nonsense. I'm not going to mention any countries by name. I'm not going to badmouth or promote any countries here. But there is a couple of countries that are very well known for doing this. And this could sometimes be to target companies, perhaps, or for financial gain. Now, state actors will work at arm's length, like I said earlier, from the national government, the military, or security service that sponsors and protects them, maintaining what we call plausible deniability, like I said earlier. So they might get sponsored and funded by their government or the military or whatever secret service they work for, but they're going to work at arm's length. And if anyone asks them, hey, who do you work for? They're going to say, no, we don't work for anyone. And that's to maintain plausible deniability. These folks are likely to pose as independent groups or even hacktivists, like I said earlier. They may or may not wage false flag disinformation campaigns that try to implicate other states, even in some cases. Alright, and then moving on to a topic called organized crime and competitors. Now, folks, in many countries, not all countries, but in many countries, cybercrime, believe it or not, has actually overtaken physical crimes in terms of number of incidents and losses. Isn't that hard to believe? It's staggering to believe these stats. Now, folks, also something to keep in mind here is organized crime can actually operate across the internet from a different jurisdiction than its victim. And this obviously, as you can imagine, increases the complexity when it comes to prosecution. Criminals will seek any opportunity they can get for profit, but typical activities of these criminals will be things like financial fraud, this is against individuals and companies, and of course, good old fashioned blackmail and extortion. You guys will also generally notice that these criminals are normally very well funded. They've got a lot of resources. So it's not just some wannabe hacker somewhere, a lone hacker as we call them. No, these are normally hacker groups that are very well organized and very well funded. They've got a lot of resources to their disposal, and often they've got high capability as well. So that makes it a little bit harder to take these guys down because of, well, all the funding they've got. Sometimes you'll even find cases where some of these groups are funded by a state of some kind. So you can only imagine how much resources they'll have to their disposal in those situations. Now, most espionage is thought to be pursued by state actors. But it is not inconceivable that a rogue business might use cyber espionage against its competitors. Very common nowadays. So these days, competitors will often use any means to their disposal to try and take down their competitors or to try and give them a disadvantage of some kind. So if I work for company A and I've got a competitor, let's call that company B, I might be inclined to go and hire some sort of cyber group, let's just call them a cyber group, to try and give my opponents or my competitors some sort of disadvantage. This can be to go and damage their systems, or it could be something as simple to go and spread some disinformation out there. Either way, it's going to give me an advantage and my competitors a disadvantage. That's a very good reason why people will sometimes go and do this. So such attacks, folks, could aim at theft or to disrupt a competitor's business or damage their reputation. Like we said, disinformation, all that. Competitors' attacks might be facilitated by employees who may or may not have recently changed companies and they bring insider knowledge with them. So sometimes these employees that work for you, maybe right from the beginning, they were an inside man. I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of those terms, but they never really worked for you. They were on the payroll. Yes, you hired them. They might have gone through the whole hiring process and all that. There was an interview, all that. But they never really fully worked for you. From the beginning, they were kind of a spy of sorts. Then you get those that, this is actually the more common scenario, which actually legitimately did work for you, but now they went to your competitor. Maybe not because they didn't like you, it's just they went to the competitor and now they're just giving the competitor all kinds of information. Which is why most companies these days will make their employees sign a non-disclosure agreement. So should you go and work for another company, whether they're in the same line of business or not, you're not allowed to disclose any company secrets. How they do business, anything regarding their clients, you're not allowed to disclose that kinds of stuff. So this has even happened to me. I've worked for many companies over my life, and even if I did not sign one of those agreements, I still would not go and disclose that information because you can get sued for that. But I did actually sign those disclosure agreements. And when I went from one company to another company that does the same thing, I would not tell them anything about the previous company. Not just because of my ethics, it's just I wouldn't because of the non-disclosure agreement. You can get sued for that, like I said. But unfortunately, not everybody's like me. Some people will go to a competitor, and maybe that was their intention from the beginning to go to a competitor, and they'll give them all kinds of juicy details, trade secrets, you name it. So, yeah, guys, be very careful of that. You should never do that yourself. And unfortunately, we need to try and be careful of our employees as well that might potentially go and do that. So, maybe make some of your employees sign some sort of non disclosure agreement. At least then you can kind of hold them liable, legally speaking. Alright, and then folks, I'm going to take you to the next topic, which is the last topic for this specific section, and then we'll move into the next main section. So this topic is internal threat actors. Once again, we know an actor is someone that's, doing some sort of cybersecurity activity, may or may not be a hacker, may or may not have a lot of experience or not, which they call capability. So under this topic, first thing we're going to mention is malicious internal threat. So this is malicious, which means it's most likely on purpose. It's not accidental. You get malicious, which is obviously on purpose. This was planned. It was their intention. Unintentional or accidental, well, I think that speaks for itself. It's a oopsie daisy kind of situation. So under malicious internal threats, what do we have there? This could be someone that has or has had authorized access, such as an employee. This is maybe someone that's a disgruntled employee. He or she is currently working for your company, or they did work for your company. They've got some level of privilege, some level of access, and that can be very dangerous, as you guys can imagine. This is one of the golden reasons why we use that golden rule in IT, which is called least privilege. You never give someone or something more access than what they need to achieve a task or a goal, including your own account. This is for many reasons, and one of those reasons is in case one of these people are a spy, perhaps, they become rogue, things like that. So if they do have access to your environment, their access is going to be limited. They can't see everything. They can't access everything. They can only see certain things and do certain things. Now that can still do a certain level of damage, but at least we can control the damage. We can contain the damage. So yeah, under has or has had, this is potentially someone that's still currently working for you, a disgruntled employee, or someone has now just left the company and they might have potentially gone to a competitor. Maybe that's why they're doing this. Or maybe they're just acting out. They're staying at home, they're still unemployed, and they're acting out. Other kinds of malicious internal threats you might get is employees. Current employees, which kind of still is the same thing as the previous point I just mentioned. So current employees, contractors, or partners. So these are folks that are actively still in your environment, or at least the environment of your client, and they actively still have access. So they are a threat. It doesn't mean they will go and do something. It's just the potential. What is the chances of them possibly going and doing this? So that is a threat. Something we did discuss actually earlier in this video. We discussed what threat is and risk is and all that kinds of stuff, along with vulnerability. And then another malicious internal threat you get, this is the last one under malicious, sabotage, financial gain, and business advantage. There are going to be times you're going to have people that will sabotage you, your company, or your client's company. It might have been their intention from the beginning, or maybe they just changed their minds over time. So maybe they've been working for you for a couple of years. One of your competitors went to them and made them a nice fat offer and said, hey, we will hire you if you go and sabotage the following. It could be. Maybe they're just rogue. That's the more common reason. People have gone rogue. They're upset because they did not get that promotion, that yearly increase, or that, whatever it might be. Maybe that Christmas bonus. They're upset about it, and now they're going to sabotage the company before they leave. Normally, they will do this right before they leave. Now, on that note, guys, you'll find that what a lot of companies will go and do is, if someone has resigned from a company, we'll normally go and revoke that person's privileges as quickly as possible, because there's always this odd chance that this person might go and sabotage the company. Not saying it will happen, but it actually happens more commonly than I would like to admit. I've seen some companies will even go and pay the person to leave early. So if this person has to give 1 month's notice before they leave the company, there are companies out there that will even pay them out for that 1 month. They'll say, you know what, we'll pay that 1 month's salary, but please leave early. Not on a mean note, anything like that, but just very politely ask them, please leave early. And the reason they do that is because this person is a threat. It's a very good chance that this person can go and sabotage the company while they still work there. For them to be able to do their work, they might still need some level of privilege. But when they have that privilege, that could be very, very risky. So we're not going to go and do that. Instead, it might be better for the company to say, you know what? Here's some money. You can leave early. You can even start earlier at your next company. Yes, we're not going to have any employee now. So, that's obviously bad as well. But it's not nearly as bad as the potential for this person to go and sabotage your company. Anyway, so this person could also go and do this for financial gain. Maybe they see something in the company, some sort of information or data, and they can go and use this for some sort of financial gain. They can sell it themselves. They can take it to a competitor. Maybe they want to use this for their own business, to give their own business an advantage. Maybe they started their own company, or they plan on going to another company and giving that other company a business advantage in exchange for, once again, some sort of financial gain. Or it could just be that this person was a spy from the beginning from a competitor, and this could be because that competitor wants some sort of, once again, business advantage. All right, so let me give you guys a couple of unintentional insider threats. So these are not on purpose, it's just things that we sometimes overlook. It could be things like weak policies and procedures. These policies can be any kinds of policies. It can be data loss prevention policies. If you look at Office 365, you've got things like data loss prevention policies, archiving policies, retention policies, sensitivity labels, all kinds of things like that. But something more common that you guys can relate to might be something like good old-fashioned group policies. So maybe this is group policies or just general security policies in your company or your client's company. And when we say weak policies, we mean either there is none, or there's very little, or they've not been configured properly. This is often due to lack of IT experience and things like that. There's maybe not proper procedures in place. These procedures are things like what people are allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, when they're allowed to do it, how they're allowed to go and do it, things like that. I'm gonna grab at some random straws here and give you guys a couple of examples. So if you look at physical security in a company, yes, this also applies to physical security. If somebody has to go and authenticate to open a door by, let's say, providing a PIN, a fingerprint, or maybe a retina scan, or even a smart card, if they've got to authenticate, ideally, We want everybody to authenticate when they open that company door. But if I go and authenticate and someone says, hey, can you please hold that door for me? And I hold the door open, which is called tailgating amongst many other things. If I hold the door open, that is a threat now because that person did not authenticate. How do we know this person's allowed to be there or not allowed to be there? So one of our procedures in our company could potentially be, don't hold the door open for somebody, let them authenticate. Politely tell them, no, I'm just going to close the door. You have to authenticate again because of security reasons. But you can do it very politely. You don't have to be a Karen about it. Be very polite about it. Explain to them very quickly and politely that, sorry, no, that's against our company policies. It's a security risk. Please authenticate again. And then once again, in terms of weak policies, I'm going to grab at some straws here and I'm going to give you guys some examples. This could be that the company does not have a policy that says people's passwords expire. They might have one or two password policies that says people need to have an 8-character password or longer, but they don't have a policy that says people can't use the same password. They don't have policies that says people are not allowed to use a password that looks similar. They don't have policies that says passwords expire. Those are just some examples. So you want to make sure you've got proper policies in place. Then you get, of course, situations where you do have policies or procedures, but your company or that of your client is not adhering to these policies or procedures. It's one thing to have them, but it's an entirely different thing to get the users to actually adhere to set policies and procedures. You might have a procedure in place that says, don't hold the door open for people. So it's actually there. The procedure is there. It says, don't do it. But whether people are actually going to listen to the company, yeah, different story. You might have a policy or a procedure in place that says, don't use your company computer to go and do personal things like watching movies, doing downloads. That's a policy that's in place. But will people actually adhere to that? That's a different story. Now, if you have employees that don't adhere to these policies and procedures, that is going to go and put certain things at risk. So if you look at something like a computer that they're using now for personal things like watching movies and whatnot, that might potentially put that computer at risk. They might potentially get some sort of malware in that computer now, and then later down the line, they want to go and use that same computer to go and access company resources, putting the whole company at risk now due to that malware. So yeah, weak adherence to policies can also pose a massive risk to a company. Speaking of massive risks to company, that brings us to lack of training and security awareness. I think that's easily the most dangerous thing you can find in any company. You can have security that looks like it's straight from Microsoft or NASA or something, but at the end of the day, if your users don't have any training, or at least the users of your client's company, that's not going to help you one bit. It's always going to come down to the user. You're only as strong as your weakest link. What is the weakest link? It is normally the users, guys. So you need to go and give your people training. It doesn't have to be anything fancy like what we're doing here right now. Nothing sophisticated like this. No. You could literally just invite them all to the boardroom perhaps one day during their lunch and say, hey guys, if you receive an email from people you don't know, don't open it. If you see an attachment or a link in an email that you were not expecting, do not open it. Do not click it. So I'm using an email here as an example, but you get the idea. So this could be basic IT training, telling people, don't do this, don't do that, watch out for this, watch out for that. You guys get what I'm saying? I think this should make more sense to you guys. Now, you can also go and potentially put this in an email for the people, but I've seen so many users ignore these emails. A lot of companies do this, including a lot of companies I work with. And at the moment, I still work with a couple of companies, and I still see them doing this. They'll send out these mass mails to all their employees that says, don't do this, don't do that, watch out for this, watch out for that. But more than 90% of people, they don't even open that mail, never mind read the mail. They don't. They completely ignore it. That's what most people do. They'll ignore this like a stop street. So what can we do in these situations? We might need to force it. And one of the ways you can force it, I know it's very inconvenient, guys, but we sometimes need to, is to invite all of these people into a room physically and, basically force it down their throats. Say, watch out for this. Don't do this. Yes, some of the people are still going to do it. We know they're going to do that, but your compliancy ratio is going to be much higher if you invite them into a physical room and you force them to pay attention. Now, yes, a lot of people are working remotely these days. Some of them might never be at the office, so you could potentially just invite them all into a Zoom session or a Team session, and you can train them on there as well, but I've seen the compliance is a lot less there because what they'll do is they'll have their webcams off, and they'll be doing other things in the background. They might not even be at their computer. Some of them might be at their computer, but they've got you on mute, or they're not listening to you. They're watching a YouTube video or something in the background. Potentially something like this. Hopefully it's something like this, because this is actually going to teach them something. And then the last insider threat I'm going to mention here under this topic, guys, is shadow IT. Sounds very weird, the name, but shadow IT basically comes down to the fact that some of your employees or your users will bring their own IT equipment to the office. It is IT equipment that does not belong to the company they work for. It belongs to the user. This equipment is unsanctioned. It has not been approved by the company or the IT team. Normally, the IT team would say what's allowed, what's not allowed, how it's allowed to be used, when and where it's allowed to be used. But if users are going to be bringing their own laptops, phones, and tablets and all kinds of things like that to the office, that is an unsanctioned device. That is an example of shadow IT. The same applies if they bring an access point, a router, or anything like that. It is shadow IT. That device is something the IT team does not know about. The IT team has not had the opportunity to investigate it, to check it out, to make sure it's secure in terms of settings and configurations, to make sure it's up to date, all that kind of stuff. Now, if the IT team doesn't know about it, that can obviously pose a massive risk, because this user that's now using it, they may or may know nothing about IT. They don't understand the risks involved. So now they're going to go and use their personal laptop or phone or whatever this might be on the company network now. And yeah, you can only imagine how risky that's going to be. It has not been checked out by the IT team. Alright folks, let's finally move on to the second main section of this video. That was attack surface. First topic up in this section is attack surface and vectors. So as you can see, that's going to be very much the same as the title. So in case you guys don't know, the attack surface is how many things a perpetrator, let's call this person an actor, since that's probably the proper name to call them, how many things an actor can target to get into your environment. This can be a human being, in other words, an employee or a user. It can be an app. It can be a firewall. It can be a network. You get the idea. So the attack surface is all the points at which a malicious threat actor, in other words, a hacker, could try to exploit a vulnerability. This can be any location or method where a threat actor can interact with a network port, an app, a computer, or a user. All of these are potential attack surfaces. Now, obviously, minimizing the attack surface means restricting access so that only a few known endpoints or a few protocol supports or a few services or methods are permitted. Each of these must be assessed for vulnerabilities and monitored for intrusions. So what we want to do is we want to try and minimize our attack surface. In a nutshell, this can be done by, for example, closing ports on a firewall that does not need to be open. If you've got services running that does not need to be running, you can go and turn them off. If you've got users that's not been trained on security, you might want to go and train them, because if you train them, that's actually technically reducing your attack surface if you think about it. If you go and secure people's endpoints, their laptops, desktops, tablets, and phones, that will be a way of reducing your attack surface. So this can be by installing an antivirus. That's going to be a good start. Obviously, turning a firewall on or getting a better firewall. And then even better would be to go and implement some sort of policies, compliance policies, data loss prevention policies, all kinds of policies like this will obviously reduce your attack surface. And then, of course, making sure these machines are up to date. The more up to date they are, the better, because then you're also reducing your attack surface. It's less things someone can go and take advantage of in a nutshell. Now, to evaluate the attack surface, you need to consider attributes of threat actors that pose the most risk to your organization. For example, the attack surface for an external actor, in other words, a hacker outside your company, should be far smaller than that of an insider threat, because people that's inside your company are inside your firewall. They most likely are authorized. They most likely have some sort of privilege, which is pretty much the same thing. So obviously what they can access and what they can do is a lot bigger than somebody that's outside the company. Now, from a threat actor's perspective, each part of the attack surface represents a potential vector for attempting an intrusion. Now, a threat vector, in case you folks don't know what that is the path that a threat actor uses to execute a data exfiltration, service disruption, or disinformation attack. Sophisticated threat actors will make use of multiple vectors most likely, and they're probably very likely to go and plan a multi-stage campaign rather than a single smash and grab type of raid. Also, highly capable threat actors will be able to develop novel vectors. This means that the threat actor's knowledge of your organization's attack surface may be better than your own. Yes, that's a thing, guys. So there is cases where the threat actor or this perpetrator will actually know your organization and its security sometimes better than you even do. And that is not a good thing. And if they know it very well, they'll obviously know how to go and abuse it and to take advantage of it and to get past your security because, well, they know it better than you. Alright, and then moving on to the second topic in this section, vulnerable software vectors. Yes, we're going to talk about so many kinds of vectors. You're going to be tired of it by the end of this module, guys. So first up, vulnerable software. Now, vulnerable software, well, I think the name speaks for itself. We know what vulnerable means. We know what software is. So vulnerable software could be something like faults in code or in its design. So maybe the manufacturers or developer of the software, they made a boo-boo because we are humans after all. Nobody's perfect. And someone somewhere that's got nothing better to do with the time, they might have discovered that vulnerability. This is generally going to be called a zero-day exploit until the manufacturer or the developer goes and patches it. Now that is a problem, that fault in the code or the design, because until it gets patched, you can imagine someone can go and take advantage of that. That can be very disastrous for a huge organization or a huge company. So that's just one example of vulnerable software. Other examples of vulnerable software is the delays and difficulty in patching. It's not like in the old days, like 10 years ago, or should I say 20 years ago, when you had a software and it'll take freaking forever for a newer version to be released. But in the meantime, the current version you have is generally going to be very up to date and very secure. Nowadays, with the new modern softwares, the softwares have gotten so freaking complex. And there's a new update or a newer version out every second or third month, which means these developers often focus their attention more on the newer stuff instead of the older stuff that needs to be maintained and secured. So if there is some sort of vulnerability in your software or your operating system or whatever it might be, the developers are not going to be so focused on your vulnerability. They're instead going to be focused more on the newer version, the software or the operating system that needs to be released, because they're trying to make money and they've got deadlines and stuff they need to meet. So it's not just about money, but that's one of the main driving forces for these people. It's they want to make money, so they're going to try and release a newer version as quickly as possible. But they're also just in general more focused on the newer versions versus the older versions. So if you've got an old version of a software, yeah, you can expect to wait a lot longer for it to be patched or for some sort of update to be released, assuming, of course, it's actually still supported. You'll notice these days, operating systems and softwares, they reach their end of life, or let's just say the end of support, a lot quicker. I mean, Windows 10 has already been announced. They're going to stop supporting it, I think, around October 2025, so that's going to be this year. Now, it's safe to assume Microsoft may or may not push that date back, because if you look at the amount of people that's still currently on Windows 10, that's up to 70% of people are still on Windows 10, which is quite weird. Now, because of how many people are still on Windows 10, there's a very good chance that Microsoft might actually be forced to kick the date further back down the road. In other words, kicking the can down the road, as some people might say. Other vulnerable software vectors is unsupported systems and applications. So this could just be an application or a system that's very outdated. That's actually the most likely reason. We call this legacy. And like I said earlier, these days, designers or these developers and stuff, they're making softwares and operating systems quicker than ever. So the older versions of their operating systems and applications are becoming legacy, or they're being considered legacy, a lot quicker, which means there's absolutely no support. So obviously after they're no longer supported, if somebody or something discovers some sort of weakness in an operating system or an application of some kind, and yeah, don't hold your breath, there's not going to be any update anytime soon. So unless this happens to be some sort of open source operating system or application, which means you're allowed to go and edit the code and all that, then you can get your own guys to go and implement some sort of remedy. Unless it happens to be open source, yeah, you're going to have a problem, folks. That is going to be a problem. How are you going to go and update it? You might even have your own in-house developers. They know how to go and do it, but they can't go and do it because it's not open source. So yeah, you better hope something is open source if it reaches the end of life. So if you have in-house developers, they can hopefully go and implement their own code and fix this hole in the program or this hole in the operating system. Now, with this all being said, this is one of the main reasons why you'll find so many companies will go to a newer operating system. It's not necessarily because they like the new operating system or because they want a new operating system. I mean, granted, those might be some of the reasons. It's often because they have to from a security perspective. Companies, especially medium to large size companies, whenever an older operating system is no longer going to be supported, you'll find them switching over to the new one as quickly as possible. They cannot afford for an application or especially an operating system to not be supported. They need support from the developers or the manufacturers. If you look at something like a Microsoft operating system, like Windows 10, if Microsoft eventually decides to discontinue support for Windows 10, I can tell you now people are going to be switching over to Windows 11 very quickly. Not necessarily because they want to, some yes, some of them no. It's because they will have to. Companies cannot afford to go without support. They need these systems to be updated. So if there's a new weakness that's discovered, let's say tomorrow, they need that weakness to be patched within the next couple of days as quickly as possible. Alright, folks, and then we've got something called client-based versus agentless. Now, you're probably wondering, what the heck is that? Well, folks, this has got a bit to do with scanning software in your company environments. So, with scanning software, this helps organizations to automate the discovery and classification of software vulnerabilities. You'll find a lot of medium to large size companies these days, they've got all kinds of cool, fancy, sophisticated scanning softwares. But I suppose it depends on your IT team's skills, their knowledge, depends on your IT budget, whether you can afford these tools, because these are not tools that necessarily come with Windows. You'll have to go and buy these tools separately, and you'll have to go and learn how to go and use them if you don't know how to go and use them yet. Now, unfortunately, folks, these very same tools can also be used by threat actors, the bad guys, in other words, as part of their reconnaissance against a target. This scanning software can be implemented as a client-based agent, in case you didn't know. The agent will then run as a scanning process installed on each host, and it reports to a management server of some kind. So normally how we'll go and do this is we will go and install this on each endpoint in our company, people's machines, and then these machines, the client PCs, will report to the server on which you've installed this. Alternatively, the vulnerability management product might use an agentless technique to scan a host without requiring any sort of installation. So that is possible these days, but it does depend on the software we're talking about. So I can't say that this is going to be the case for all of them. It depends on which one we're talking about, because you do get multiple ones out there, folks. Now, agentless scanning is most likely going to be used in threat actor reconnaissance, because these threat actors, remember, these are the bad guys, they don't necessarily have direct access to the machine, and they don't necessarily have the ability to go and install stuff directly on these machines. So since they can't always install stuff on the machines, they might need to use an agentless scanning approach instead of one that's actually installed on the machine. Makes sense, doesn't it? Alright, folks, I think we've spoken enough about software vectors. Let's talk a bit about network vectors. Now, even though the title says network vectors, here and there we are going to be mentioning software under this topic. So with that being said, vulnerable software, folks, gives a threat actor, in other words the bad guy, the opportunity to execute malicious code on a system. Now, to do this, the threat actor must be able to run the exploit code on the system or over a network to trigger that vulnerability. So it's not as simple as, hey, let me just go and run it. They need to somehow be able to do that over the network. Now, with that being said, an exploit technique for any given software vulnerability can be classed as either remote or local. So they're either going to be executed locally, so the person might be nearby, or they're going to be executed remotely, so they might be sitting someplace else. Now, in terms of remote, this means that the vulnerability can be exploited by sending code to the target over a network and does not depend on an authenticated session with the system to execute. In terms of local, that, folks, means the exploit code must be executed from an authenticated session on the computer. You'll find there's a lot of things these days where the hackers, they might have a lot of skills, There might be a very high capability user, as some folks say, but some of these things sometimes still requires the perpetrator to have direct access to the server or the machine that they're trying to compromise. So the attack could still occur over a network, but the threat actor needs to use some valid credentials or hijack an existing session to execute it. Consequently, to minimize risks from software vulnerabilities, folks, administrators must reduce the attack surface by eliminating unsecure networks. An unsecure network, in case you folks don't know, is one that lacks the attributes of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Something we have spoken about on this course before. So starting with the first one, confidentiality. With the lack of confidentiality, threat actors are able to snoop on network traffic and recover passwords or other sensitive information. These are also described as eavesdropping attacks, folks. And in terms of lack of integrity, the threat actors are able to attach unauthorized devices. These can unfortunately be used to snoop on traffic or intercept and modify it, run spoofed services and apps, or run exploit code against other network hosts. These are often described as on-path attacks. And then with the last one, in terms of lack of availability, the threat actors are able to perform service disruption attacks, and these are also described as denial of service attacks. So each of these has their own, main name, and then they've got like a subcategory name or a nickname, if you want to call it that. Now, folks, a secure network uses an access control framework and cryptographic solutions to identify, authenticate, authorize, and audit network users, hosts, and traffic. Now, folks, there are some specific threat vectors associated with unsecure networks, and these are as follows. One of them would be something like direct access. Now, this one, the threat actor uses physical access to the site to perpetrate an attack. Examples could include getting, let's say, access to an unlocked working station, using a boot disk to try and install malicious tools, or, believe it or not, physically stealing a PC, laptop, or disk drive. People still do that, by the way. And then when it comes to wired network, if it's a wired network, a threat actor with access to the site attaches an unauthorized device to a physical network port, and the device is permitted to communicate with other hosts. That's very bad, obviously. This potentially allows the threat actor to launch eavesdropping, on-path, and denial of service attacks. Now, just on a side note, before we continue here, guys, you'll find what some companies will go and do to kind of mitigate against that is they'll go and put something called port security. So if someone goes and plugs out a network cable on a switch and they plug the same cable back in, nothing happens as long as it's the same device on that port, because it memorizes the device's MAC address and things like that. But if you go and plug out a device on a port on a switch and you plug another device in, which obviously has a different MAC address and things like that, port security will kick in. Now, this could be just to send a nice little email, to the IT team security that says, hey, watch out, someone just plugged in something new on this port. Or it could do something different, like shutting down the port, which is my personal favorite. So I used to implement this at companies where if someone plugs in something else on the port, whether it was accidental or malicious, it will shut down that port automatically, and I will have to come and turn it back on manually. Rather safe than sorry, as folks say. Now, on the specific vectors, we've also got other things like remote, wireless, cloud, and Bluetooth, just to name a few. So on the remote and the wireless, folks, the attacker either obtains credentials for a remote access or wireless connection to the network, or cracks the security protocols used for authentication. Alternatively, the attacker spoofs a trusted resource such as an access point and uses it to perform credential harvesting, and then uses the stolen account details to access the network. In terms of cloud access, many companies now run part or all of the network services via internet accessible clouds. Almost everybody's using the cloud these days. The attacker only needs to find one account, service, or host with weak credentials to gain access. Scary thought, isn't it? The attacker is likely to target the accounts used to develop services in the cloud or manage cloud systems. They may also try to attack the cloud service provider, yes, that's a thing, as a way of accessing the victim's machine. And in terms of Bluetooth network, the threat actor exploits a vulnerability or misconfiguration to transmit a malicious file to user's device over the Bluetooth Personal Area Wireless networking protocol. And then lastly, folks, on the specific vectors, this could be something like default credentials. I mean, you can probably guess what that is. The attacker gains control of a network device or app because it has been left configured with a default password. You probably heard that rule in IT where we say, change the default password, folks. This applies to anything. So if there's no password, put a password on. If it comes out of its default password, which is normally going to be blank, or admin1234, those are very common default passwords for a lot of devices. Please, my goodness, folks, change that. So this can be something like a switch. It can be a firewall. It can be an access point. It can be anything. Most of these devices either have a blank password in the beginning, or their password is something like admin or admin1234. So whether it be an access point, a router, a firewall, a switch, you name it, please log in, change the default password. And in some cases, you might even need to go and change the default IP address. Otherwise, you can have an IP conflict, but that's a topic for N+, not for Security+. Oh yeah, and then one last one, folks. I almost forgot. Open service port. So if you have an open port open in your company, then you can obviously imagine that that's going to be bad. We always say any port that does not need to be open, please go and close them. Now, the good news is most ports out of the 65,536 ports, most of them are closed by default for your own safety and security. But there are a couple of them that are open for, well, various things. Some of these are considered well-known ports, which are also known as common port numbers. And if you're not using some of these port numbers, it will be wise to go and close these ports. Otherwise, somebody like a threat actor can go and take advantage of that. Alright, now moving on to another vector, lure-based vector. So we spoke about software-based vectors, we spoke about network-based vectors, now we are on lure-based vectors. So in terms of lure-based, that name should also tell you what it's about. It's about luring the user into doing something they're not supposed to, tricking them, luring them. So this can be things like bait that will tempt the target into opening it. Maybe it's going to pretend to be some sort of game, and then it's not. Sometimes whatever they're pretending to be, it actually will do that because they don't want the user to go and uninstall this. So if it's pretending to be a game, it'll probably be a game, but in the background, it's also doing something else. This can be via email, where I will try and tempt the user to open this email where they would normally not. I'll maybe go and make the subject something juicy. How to go and make money in only 5 days. Or I'll pretend like this is someone's salary slip that's been sent to them by mistake. And because of people's curiosity, they're going to want to see it. And if they click on it, boom, you've got them. Now, lure-based can also be something like a removable device. So lots of times the threat actor, they will try and trick the user or your users into opening this flash drive, this external device, or whatever it might be. They're going to try and get them to plug it in. And in some cases, to try and trigger something. Now, lots of times these days, you don't even need to go and click on something. As soon as you go and put the flash drive in or the external device into a machine, that alone is very often enough to trigger any form of malware that might be on it. Other times, you might need to actually open it and actually click on a file first. By the way, we call this a drop attack. And then the more common one these days is you don't need to do anything. As soon as the user goes and inserts that into a machine, it's going to trigger it automatically. And that, folks, is one of the reasons why we turn something called autoplay off. Now, I'm not supposed to give you guys the solutions quite yet to these things, but I'm just mentioning it. If you turn autoplay off in your machine, that's one of the ways you can somewhat mitigate against it. Now, what we also find under lure-based vectors is executable files. Now, what I mean by that, once again, it's going to pretend to be something it's not. It's going to pretend to be some cool, useful toolbar, some awesome game, some awesome software, and often whatever it pretends to be, that something will actually work. So if it's pretending to be a game, that game will most likely work because they don't want you to uninstall this. Otherwise, the malware is missing in some cases. So by tricking you to keep this on the machine, distracting you, if you will, the stuff in the background, the malware in the background, which we call a Trojan horse malware, that thing can go and do what it's supposed to. Now, Trojan horse, in case you guys don't know what it is malware that pretends to be one thing, meanwhile, it is doing something else in the background. Meanwhile, it's harming your machine in the background. Other lure-based vectors you get, this is just something that happens to fall under this category, is document files. This can be a Word document, a PDF document, things like that. And generally what they'll have is they'll have stuff embedded in them. So it might be a legitimate document with legitimate information on it, but it's got other stuff embedded into it. This includes, but is not limited to, things like macros and scripting technologies, things like that, guys. So just because it's a document that legitimately looks like a Word document or a PDF document, it might even open. That doesn't necessarily mean it's safe, folks, which is why you should always go and scan this stuff. This can also include image files, or even video files for that matter. Image files, video files. I forgot to list video files here, but it actually can also include video files. So if you've got an image file, guys, the image might legitimately open. It might be a photo of something or just a nice picture of something. That image can have malicious codes in it. So there are viewer or browser vulnerabilities. But I've also seen some people will go and use, once again, macro or scripting technologies on these images or video files. And if you go and download something very popular online, chances are you're going to get infected. One of the places I've seen this most often with is video files, especially to folks that goes and downloads movies and series online. So they go to these not so nice websites. I believe CompTIA calls them unsavory websites. You know which ones I'm talking about. And they'll go and download some sort of torrent because this is not available in their country, or it's not on their streaming service, or they don't want to pay for a streaming service maybe. They'll go and download these episodes. And if it's a very popular show or a very popular movie, there's a very good chance that that video file, folks, it might have some sort of macro or scripting technologies in it. And you're not going to like how it's going to end. Trust me. Alright, folks, and then another vector I've got for you. Yes, there's another one. This one is called message-based vector or vectors. This is the last one I'm going to talk about, in terms of these different kinds of based vectors, and then we'll move on to a slightly different topic in case you guys are tired of these vectors. Now, when using a file-based lure, folks, the threat actor, in other words, the bad guy, they need a mechanism to deliver the file and a message that will trick a user into actually opening the file on their computer. Now, consequently, any features that allow direct messaging to network users must be considered as part of the potential attack surface, folks. So I'm going to list a few here for you guys. I'm going to list 5 for you guys. The first one is email. Now, with email, the attacker sends a malicious file attachment via email or via any other communication system that allows attachments. And in this case, the attacker needs to use social engineering techniques to persuade or trick the user into actually opening the attachment. So just because I've managed to send this to you via email doesn't mean it's harmful. It's only harmful if the user falls victim to my social engineering. So I'm going to tell him, hey, I just sent you a mail. Can you quickly look at this attachment? And then boom, I've got you. Now, in terms of message-based vectors, this can also be something like a short message system. You folks might know this more commonly as an SMS. So a file or a link to a file is simply just sent to someone's device using this SMS system. And once they click on the link or they open the file, and then boom. Now, I personally don't really worry about SMS that much these days. I mean, yes, we still have SMSs and people receive them every day. But 9 out of 10 people don't even check their SMSs. I actually missed one for the last 2 days. I was supposed to go and pick up glasses for my son the other day. And the optometrist sent me an SMS. I mean, who still uses SMSs? I was expecting a phone call or a WhatsApp or an email. And the optometrist sent me an SMS. And then only after 2 days when I was doing something else did I coincidentally see this SMS. It says, hey, your son's glasses is ready for pickup. And I was like, what? So purely by chance, I saw this SMS. If it wasn't for something else I had to go and check, I would have missed this message. Very annoying. So I'm personally not too concerned about SMS, folks. Then you also get instant messaging. Good old IM. Man, this brings back some nostalgia. So many years ago, you got things like Yahoo Messenger, Hotmail Messenger, or the old-fashioned Skype and things like that. I'm not sure if any of you guys remember those. It depends on how old you are. Nowadays, you don't really get those. I mean, I suppose you still get Skype, but people are not really using it that much anymore. Instead, people will use the company version, which is called Skype for Business, which has now since been replaced by Teams. Or they'll go and use something else like Zoom or some of these other platforms. Now, getting back to the point here, in terms of IM, there are many replacements for SMS that run on Windows, Android, or iOS. Now, these can support voice and video messaging plus file attachments. So all of the ones I've mentioned earlier, both the old ones and the new ones, folks, they all support file attachments. So if I send you a message with a file attachment or a link even in it, you can imagine that that's gonna compromise your account. It can give me access to your account, or it's gonna install some sort of malware, or it's gonna do something else. Either way, not good. Then, folks, we also get web and social media. Yeah, this is very popular, especially on Facebook these days. I'm not sure if you guys have seen, but like literally half of Facebook accounts these days are hacked. Now, folks, I personally am almost never on Facebook because, well, just because of this fact, there's just too many accounts that's been compromised. And a lot of the people don't know it. So if you go check on someone's wall, that's one of the ways you'll notice. If they start posting all kinds of weird nonsense that you know for a fact that this person would never post because maybe you know them very well, talking about weight loss products or money-making tactics and things like that, and you know for a fact this friend or family member or work colleague or friend of yours, if you know for a fact they will never post things like that, yeah, that's a telltale sign that their account's most likely been compromised. Sometimes the user's been locked out. Other times they've not been locked out. They just don't know that this is happening. Now, if they're lucky, by just changing their passwords, they can potentially go and lock this perpetrator out. But it's normally going to be an automated system. Now, whatever I'm saying here, guys, is not limited to Facebook, but that's one of the main ones I've seen where people are using it less and less these days because, well, it's so annoying when half the people's accounts have been compromised. There's no real security there. So in terms of web and social media, malware may be concealed in files, attached to posts, or presented as downloads, folks. The attacker may compromise a site so that it automatically infects vulnerable browser software, a drive-by download as some people call it. Now guys, if you look at something, once again, like Facebook, if you click on the wrong post, that can give me access. If you open the wrong picture, that can give me access. And my goodness, if you use the instant messaging system on Facebook, that's one of the easiest ways to gain access to someone's account. So sometimes in the old days, you had to click on a certain link first. If someone sent you a message and they said, hey, look at this, and you click on the link, then boom, I would have access to your account. But these days, it's as serious as you just opening an instant message. So by not clicking on any link, by someone just sending you a message, even if it's someone you know, if you just open that instant message, that alone is enough to give me access to your account. So do not use the instant messaging on Facebook's platform. Strangely enough, WhatsApp is still fine, which is technically the same platform because I think they're both called Meta, I can't even pronounce that. But WhatsApp used to be a separate entity, and that's probably where the difference comes in, why their security is much better. But in terms of Facebook Messenger, guys, don't use it. If you're going to open a Facebook message, even if it's from someone you know, that's the quickest way you're going to get compromised. Also, if you accept friend requests from people you don't know, well, these days it can even be someone you know, that alone also enough for me to compromise your account. So if somebody wants to send me a friend invite, I'm going to first ask them to send me a message and say, hey, I've sent you a friend invite, please accept. But if I get a friend invite from you, even if I know you, if I was not expecting one from you, I'm not going to accept. I expect you to first phone me or in person tell me, hey, listen, bro, I just sent you a friend invite on Facebook. Can you please accept? Then I know, okay, it was you. It was not some sort of automated system. Because if it was not you, that's a very easy way to actually compromise someone's account. Anyway, we're getting a little sidetracked here in terms of social media. Now, something I also want to mention, which is more for voice and all that, message-based vectors can also be exploited by a threat actor to persuade a user to reveal a password or weaken the security configurations using some type of pretext, folks. Now, this type of attack might be perpetrated simply by placing a voice call to the user. I can sometimes just call you, if I'm this threat actor, and I can trick you into doing some of this stuff for me. I can be pretending to be from a help desk, and I can say, hey, listen, can you quickly just turn off the firewall for me? I just need to quickly test something, blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, boom, you've been compromised. Alright then, let's move on to the last topic in this specific section, supply chain attack surface. Now, on its own, the name kind of makes sense, but it also might sound somewhat confusing to some of you guys. It actually entails a lot of things, folks. So let me start at the beginning. A supply chain, which is not just an IT by the way, but we're coming at this from an IT perspective. A supply chain is the end-to-end process of designing, manufacturing, and distributing goods and services to a customer. Now that might make sense, doesn't it? Now it's going to get a little bit more complicated from this point forward. Now, folks, rather than attacking the target directly, a threat actor, in other words, the bad guy, they may seek ways to infiltrate it via companies in its supply chain. In other words, the hacker is going to try and indirectly get an attack in here. Now, the process of ensuring reliable sources of equipment and software, that, folks, is called procurement management. Now, in this procurement management, it is very helpful to distinguish several types of relationships. I'm going to mention three for you guys. The first of which is supplier. Now, the supplier, folks, I'm sure you guys know what the supplier does. The supplier obtains products directly from a manufacturer to sell in bulk to other businesses. This type of trade is often referred to as a business-to-business trade. Then you, of course, get the vendor. Well-known vendors in IT would obviously be something like CompTIA, Microsoft, those kinds of things. But vendors are obviously not just limited to IT training vendors. So with the vendor, that obtains the products from the suppliers to sell to retail businesses, which is also business to business, quite frankly, or directly to customers. The vendor can actually also sell directly to customers. Now, what the vendors also sometimes does, the vendor they may or may not, add some level of customization and direct support. So if we go look at something, let's say, like an operating system. I'm thumb sucking here, guys. If you look at something like Windows 10 or Windows 11, something that most of you guys will probably know by now, depending on the computer you buy, that Windows 10 or Windows 11 is not the stock factory Windows 10 or 11. It might have a couple of extra additional softwares. One such brand is Dell. I'm just giving you guys a totally random example here, not promoting or demoting any brands here. But if you look at something like Dell, they've got a lot of extra additional softwares, functions, and features embedded in the operating system. It's not the stock standard version of the operating system. They've got lots of extra thingies that's now embedded in here. That's an example of the vendor adding their own customization. Now, something else you get here is a business partner. Now, with business partners, this implies a closer relationship where two companies share quite closely aligned goals and marketing opportunities. For example, guys, if that doesn't make sense, Microsoft, which is a very big name, so I'm going to use that name again, is a major software manufacturer and a vendor, of course. But it is not feasible for such a huge entity for it to establish direct relationships with all its potential customers. I mean, guys, you know how big Microsoft is, and we know how many customers they've got. It is not feasible. It's completely insane for them to go and directly communicate with all customers. It's not feasible. So they're going to need some help. So to expand its markets, it develops partner relationships with original equipment manufacturers, which you guys might know as OEMs, and solution partners. Microsoft then operates a program or certification, kind of like this CompTIA A+ certification. So they've got their own programs of certification and training for its partners, which improves product support and security awareness. So every time Microsoft releases a product, they will go and release various training courses for that product and various certifications. People can go and learn about this course. They can go and certify in that course. And that in turn doesn't just give those people the skills and a potential income, it also helps support Microsoft indirectly if you think about it. So each supplier and vendor has its own supply chain, folks. For example, something as simple as a motherboard manufacturer and supplier will use companies to fabricate individual chip components. The supply chain extends to distribution, and obviously this includes things like delivery companies and couriers, which are part of it. So yeah, guys, a motherboard is not just one person that makes it. There's various companies that will go and make various chips. At the end of the day, all of these companies will work together to actually get the board made. And then we still need to get this board delivered to where it needs to go, where it needs to be stored and sold and built into computers. There's a lot of people here in this chain link. Each of these is a link in the chain. So the supply chain breadth and complexity exposes organizations to a huge attack surface. I mean, if you look at how big the supply chain is, I mean, we've got people making chips, people that's making other components of the boards, people has to put it all together, the people has to put it in boxes, the people has to go and get it from one destination to another destination, people has to store it and has to sell it and all that. Each of these things I've just mentioned is a link in the chain or a link in the supply chain, and each of them could possibly be compromised. So it's very important that you, or whoever this is, that they trust every link in the supply chain. Because the bigger your supply chain is, or the more links you've got in this chain of yours, imagine an actual chain, the higher the threat is. Because the more places there is for a perpetrator, a bad actor, the more places there is for them to go and launch an attack of some kind. Basically, anyone with the time and resources to modify the computer's firmware, they can potentially go and create a backdoor access, so that's not good. If anyone is alone or left alone of this motherboard, you can only imagine what they can do. They can go and compromise it, put it back in its box, and then go and sell it to the better market, and then, whoever ends up with it is not going to be too happy. The same is true for any computer or any network hardware, software, or service, quite frankly, folks. Establishing a trusted supply chain for computer equipment and services essentially means denying malicious actors the time or resources to modify the assets supplied. The IT industry, folks, also depends on trade in industry services as well as physical assets. A managed services provider, which we generally just call MSP for short, they provision and support IT resources such as networks, security, or web infrastructure. Now, these MSPs are useful when an organization finds it cheaper or more reliable to outsource all or even part of IT provisioning rather than just trying to manage it all directly themselves. From a security point of view, this type of outsourcing, folks, is complex as it can be difficult to monitor the whole MSP. The MSP's employees are all potential sources of insider threats, if you think about it. So that's generally why we try and avoid that as much as we can, Alright folks, so finally that brings us to an end to the second main section of this video. Moving on to the third and the last main section in this module, social engineering. Alright folks, the first topic in this last section is human vectors. Yes, I know, you're probably wondering, there we go again of the vectors. But this time we're talking about social engineering. So human does not fall under the previous sections we were talking about. A human vector is part of social engineering. Because social engineering, in a nutshell, is to trick someone into doing something or to trick someone into giving you something. That's if I have to put it into a nutshell. But we'll go into that in more depth in just a moment. So under human vectors, we're talking about hacking the human. Like I said, tricking them into doing something or giving you something. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the weakest links in most companies. As I've said earlier in this module, you can have security that looks like it's straight from NASA, for crying out loud. The latest of the latest, the best of the best. But if you have normal people working in your company that have not been educated in security, then all that security is going to go out the window and it's not going to mean nothing. So you need to train your people. I'm not saying you have to put them on a fancy course. Just train them on the basics of security. What to look out for. For example, tell these people that someone will not mail them to ask them for their password or username for any platform. That's not normally how it works. Most platforms, they generally have your username and password on their system. They will not contact you to ask you what your username and password is. That will be an example. Because a lot of people are going to receive emails, which are basically a phishing expedition. They're going to receive an email from some perpetrator, a bad actor, and they're going to pretend to be some sort of well-known person or well-known entity, company, like their bank, and they're going to say, hey, we need you to quickly confirm your username and password. And these people are going to fall victim to that. So train your people not to fall victim to those kinds of nonsense. Now, the purposes of social engineering, folks, is to trick users, like I've said so many times before. So this includes, but is not limited to, things like reconnaissance and eliciting information. So these people can go and use social engineering as a tactic to see what's going on in your company, to learn more about your company. Because sometimes these bad actors, they're not inside your company, they're working remotely. Now, they want to compromise your company, break into your company, but sometimes to do that, they need a little bit more. They need more information. Now, if they can't get in, another way to get the information they need is to trick your users into giving them what they need to know. They might ask these users, do you have a firewall? They'll obviously do it indirectly. Do you have servers on premises or on the cloud? How many servers do you have? What kind of servers do you have? Are you an administrator or blah, blah, blah? So obviously these questions will not be asked directly, but they are going to trick these users into answering questions, giving them more information which they can use into another attack. Now, under all of this, we can also say this is used to do intrusions and gaining unauthorized access. So once they've gotten that information out of the user, whatever information they were after, they can use this to do some sort of intrusion or gain unauthorized access. Now, there's many possible scenarios, folks. Many. I'm just going to give you guys 3 here, but there's actually many. So one scenario would be to persuade a user to run a malicious file. So sometimes there might be a scary message that pops up on the user's screen, a fake message of sorts. It tells them, please click on the following file to run an antivirus scan. Your computer has been compromised. Click on the following button or the following link to run an antivirus scan. And as soon as they click on this button or this link, boom, something happens on the machine. So you'll find especially a lot of these happening in browsers. So if you go to certain websites and you don't have proper sufficient security, pop-up blockers and all that kinds of jazz, you're going to see a lot of pop-ups popping up. Now for people in IT like ourselves, it's not too big of a deal because we know we just ignore these. But for someone that's not in IT, I'm not saying these are dumb people, it's just they're in a different field. They might be a doctor, a lawyer or something. They don't know about these threats, how they work and all that kinds of stuff. So we are there to protect these people like guardians. Now, unfortunately, some of these people are going to click on some of these ads from time to time, and they are going to install stuff on their machines from time to time, or just execute malware in some cases. So there's many ways that you can go and persuade the user to go and run a malicious file. That is just one of them, guys. Other possible scenarios would be to contact a help desk and solicit information out of them. So sometimes these bad actors, these threat actors, will contact an IT help desk or sometimes a different kind of help desk, and they'll pretend like they need some sort of assistance. Meanwhile, they don't really need assistance per se. They're using this as an indirect method to get information out of the help desk. Yes, it's a thing, guys. Just because the help desk is an IT does not mean they don't have a target on their back. Help desks actually sometimes fall victim to this too, believe it or not. And then the last scenario I'm going to give you guys is gaining access to premises and installing a monitoring device. Now, unfortunately for this to work, the person generally needs direct access to the premises. There is ways and means to do this without direct access, but generally the perpetrator would have needed to be on premises, physically in person at one point in time, to install some sort of monitoring device. This monitoring device could be software too, by the way, just FYI, could be spyware. If you look at spyware, lots of forms of spyware often requires the perpetrator to have direct access to the machine at some point in time. And if they had direct access to the machine, they could obviously go and insert a flash drive or something like that and install the software. Now, there are ways to get spyware onto a machine even if you don't have direct access, but most of them involves having direct access to the machine, and the same applies to these monitoring devices. You or the perpetrator would have had to have access to the premises at least once at some point in time. Alright, I'm going to move you guys on to something called impersonation and pretexting. So impersonation, for those of you that don't know, means pretending to be someone you're not. I suppose you can say it's a form of spoofing to a certain extent, if you know what spoofing is. Forging something. Now folks, these people that are going to pretend to be someone they're not, or from a department they're not, they're very persuasive, consensus, and they've got a liking approach. So generally you'll find that, oh, okay, it seems like the guy from the IT department. He or she is so friendly, so helpful. Meanwhile, this person doesn't even work for the IT department. They're just pretending to work for the IT department because they need information or they want to try and compromise your machine or gain some other form of unauthorized access. They'll basically try and coerce you into doing things you're not supposed to, kind of force you. So generally, I would ask you, hey, can you kindly please do the following for me? If now's not a good time, let me know and I'll come back later if it's not urgent. But these people, especially these scammers and whatnot, you can go and find a lot of videos about this online on YouTube, by the way. Go run a search on YouTube when you've got free time and if you're in for a good laugh. There's lots of funny videos about this on YouTube, by the way. Run a search on YouTube for these scammers, these hacker scammers that get caught out by an even bigger hacker, a white hat hacker. So you get lots of these IT scammers. They're normally in some urban countries, and they'll try and trick people that know nothing about IT into giving you important information or running a file or doing something that's not nice. They'll give you a sense of urgency that you need to do this right now. If you don't do this right now, you're going to lose your data. Or if you don't do this right now, it's going to cost you the following amount. They'll give you a sense of urgency, these scammers and whatnot. And if you're going to act calm and you're going to be slow on the phone. You're going to really irritate these people. And if you go watch those scammer videos, it's hilarious to see how these white hat hackers, which are sometimes way, way better than the scammers, how they catch them out. They'll pretend to be dumb, like they've got no experience, like they're very incapable. Meanwhile, they know way more than these low capable scammers or hackers, whatever you want to call them. So just to summarize that first point we've got there, persuasive, consensive, and liking. So there's two ways to go about this. You can either go and try and get the user or the department to like you, or you can try and intimidate them, scare them into doing stuff, force them into doing stuff. So if the persuasive bullet point there, that is to convince the target that the request is a natural one. And it will obviously be a bit impolite or even just odd to refuse this, you know? The second point there is one where you're going to go and give them a sense of urgency. You're going to try and intimidate them, you know, maybe pretend to be someone from the IT department, scare them and tell them this needs to be done immediately. I need to check your machine right now. Give me access right now. There's something very urgent that I need to do. And that's going to scare people, especially if they know you're from the IT department or if they think you're from the IT department. So that one, we can say it is to intimidate the target with a bogus appeal to authority or penalty, such as getting fired or not acting quickly enough to prevent some dire outcome. So you're just going to basically scare them. You're going to tell them, hey, if you don't do this now, you're going to get fired. Or something bad is going to happen. You basically scare them to a certain degree. Now, folks, a classic impersonation attack is generally for a social engineer to do something like phoning into the department. And these social engineers will then claim to have to adjust something on their system. And they'll claim that they have to do this remotely. They'll give you a sense of urgency. We need to do this immediately. And generally, they'll somehow get the user to reveal their password. And that's the last thing the user needs to do, as you can imagine. They generally have a whole dialogue already planned, you know. So they probably have this written down for all we know. A script, if you want. Call it a script like a movie script. So they've got a script of lines that they're ready to say. And it's going to sound very convincing. Now, guys, when they use this carefully crafted story, which sounds very convincing and sometimes very intimidating to a certain degree, that is called pretexting. It's a script of sorts. So if you don't know what pretexting is, it's kind of when the perpetrator goes and makes a script of sorts. They already know what they're going to say. They've 10 to 1 written down the sentences of what they're going to say. And if you have a certain response, they've already got an automated response for that. So that is pretexting. They're kind of predicting what you're going to say. They've got answers for every question you might have or everything you might potentially say. So folks, with pretexting, these perpetrators normally make a very convincing impersonation. And this is to either charm or intimidate the target. And this usually depends on the attacker obtaining privileged information about the organization. So if this perpetrator has any information about the organization or the person they're talking to, they can actually make this sound more believable. And that's why you guys need to be very careful for other things which we call dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is not a topic right now, but it is security related. So dumpster diving is not necessarily someone actually diving into a dumpster like the American dumpsters you get. No, this can just generally be someone going through your trash. This could be a little bin underneath your desk. Maybe you've got some sticky notes there or any documents or papers that's not been shredded. And if they can find anything of value, which is not necessarily a password, a username, or an account number, no. This can just be general information about the company or the person at that desk. Now, if they can find that information, they can actually use that information to their advantage. They can phone you or email you and list some of that information, and they can make themselves sound more legit. So they can pretend to be from the IT department, and obviously if they mention some information that other people would normally not know, it's going to sound more legit, don't you think? So be very careful of stuff you just throw in your trash, guys, because that can potentially be used in a pretexting environment. Now, in these pretexting environments, you'll find the attacker will sometimes impersonate a member of the organization's IT support team. Like I said, the attack will be way more effective with the identity details of the person being impersonated and the target. So obviously, the more details they've got, the more effective it's going to be, the more believable it's going to be. Now, folks, some social engineering techniques are actually, in fact, dedicated to obtaining this type of intelligence as a reconnaissance activity. So they might not be out to hack you immediately. When they talk to you, their main goal that specific day or that specific moment might just be to get information. So they can use it later down the line, maybe later today, next week, next month, or even next year in some cases, you never know. So as most companies are set up towards customer service rather than security, yeah, this information is typically quite easy to come by, unfortunately. Now, information that might seem innocuous, such as department employee lists, job titles, phone numbers, diaries, invoices, or purchase orders, that, guys, can help an attacker penetrate an organization through impersonation. The more they know, the more believable it's going to sound, because it's almost as if they work there. Meanwhile, they don't work there, they've just kind of been carefully studying your company, actually. Alright, folks, I'm gonna move you on to the next topic here, phishing and farming. Now, before we dive into this topic, I'm gonna play a bit of a game with you guys. So for those of you that's been on my channel for a while, especially if you watch my long videos, you'll know what game is coming up right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you either a word or a phrase. You guys can either go and type it as is in the comment section, but that's just boring, so I wouldn't advise that. Or you can have some fun with this word or phrase and make a new sentence with it. Now, the purpose of this is just for laughs, actually, more than anything else. So if anyone is reading through the comment section just randomly, which people like to do from time to time, and they have not watched the video up until this point, they'll have no idea what's going on, because why are people saying this random word or this random phrase the whole time? And only people that's obviously watched the video up until this point, only they will know what's going on. So today's random word is one word. It is Cylon. Yes, Cylon. So that is a word from a TV movie or a TV series. If you've watched it, you'll know what it is. And I want you guys to preferably create a sentence using the word Cylon. Now, the only rules to this is you need to stick to YouTube's policies and guidelines. So no swearing, guys. Don't say anything mean. So you're obviously welcome to make something funny of this if you want to, but just stick to YouTube's rules. I don't want the YouTube police on my case or your case. That's not going to be nice. So let's see who can be the most creative with the word Cylon. Now, besides this, you guys are obviously still welcome to post your normal questions in the comment section down below. And if I see any questions, I will gladly answer those questions as quickly as I possibly can. So this is just an extra side game for giggles and all that. So that out of the way, guys, let's move on to phishing and farming. Now, phishing, yes, you do spell it like that. It's not a spelling mistake, guys. You actually get different kinds of phishing, but the main kind of phishing you get is to trick a user, normally via email, into clicking on a link or to giving information. So if I send you an email and I, for example, pretend to be a company or an entity that you're comfortable with, let's say your bank, perhaps. If I send you an email and I pretend to be your bank, and I ask you for your username and your password, that would be an example of phishing. Now, on its own, that's not very effective, as you can imagine, because even people that's not in IT might not necessarily fall victim to this, because if you see an email coming from the bank, but it doesn't look like it's coming from the bank, if you look at the email address and it comes from, let's say, an @gmail or an @outlook.com email address, yeah, that looks pretty suspicious, wouldn't you say? So even people that's not in IT would not necessarily fall victim to that, because even they know they need to go and look for the email address that it's coming from. But if it actually comes from an email that actually looks like it's coming from the bank, what do we call that? That, folks, it's called spoofing. Phishing is most commonly combined with spoofing. Spoofing is basically, in a nutshell, to go and forge something like an email address. So these perpetrators, these bad actors, these bad apples, they will go and spoof an email address for a well-known person or entity, and they'll pretend to be that person or entity, and they'll try and get information out of the user. So that is phishing in a nutshell. It's usually going to be via email, but it's not limited to that. So that being said, phishing is to trick the target into using a malicious resource. So I want to trick them into going to a certain website, and maybe the website is the malicious platform. That could be an example of farming, which we'll talk about just in a moment. That's also in the title. Or the link in itself was malicious. So as soon as you click the link, I've compromised your machine, although that doesn't really classify as phishing now, does it? So generally, for this to be phishing, the link will take them to a resource like a website where I'm going to do something called farming. More on that in just a second. Or in the email itself, I'm just going to ask them for information. It could be something like that. Phishing can also be to spoof legitimate communications and sites. So I can go and pretend to be someone I'm not, a person or an entity. And I send you an email, looks like it's coming from them, so that's spoofing legitimate communications. In terms of sites, they will go and make a fake website that looks exactly like a real website. This could be something as simple as Facebook, guys. Facebook requires a person to log in. Or Twitter, which they now call X, or Instagram, or your banking website. These websites requires users to log in. Now, if I give you a link to click on, and it takes you to a website that looks exactly like the real website, but it's not, That is farming, which we'll get to in just a second. So if I trick you to go to that website and you go and type in your details, I'm going to farm your details. Now, other kinds of phishing you get, let's call these subcategories, is vishing. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's pretty much the same can of worms, folks. This is just to do it via a voice telephone call. So if I phone you instead of mailing you, and I pretend to be some person or entity like the bank once again, and I try and get information out of you, that is called vishing. Then of course you get smishing. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm probably butchering the name, but it is via a message. So it's kind of like an SMS of sorts. So I'm going to send you a message, a text message, most likely via SMS, and I'm going to try and persuade you into giving me details. Now, obviously, folks, it goes without saying that passive techniques have less risk of detection. So the more passive it is, the better for these perpetrators. They will generally try and use the path of least resistance, and they will generally try and use the path that's the easiest and that's the least amount of risk for them to be detected. And then just quickly a recap here. I did actually kind of accidentally explain this. Farming. Farming is usually to try and get a user onto a website. How you do that is up to you if you're the perpetrator, but it'll normally be a link in an email or something like that. They click on the link or something like that. They go to a website that looks like a legitimate website. They type in their login details, and this perpetrator will get their login details. Now, sometimes to not raise suspicion, and it's not really part of the topic here, right after the user types in the login details, it'll actually divert them to the real website that looks just like that. Why, you ask? Well, think about it. If you go to Facebook or your bank or anything like that, and you type in your login details, and the page just says wrong login details, or it just reloads and nothing happens, you're gonna start thinking this is suspicious, don't you think? You might even try and reset your password, which is not what they want. So to not raise any alarm bells, they'll divert you to the real website after that, and you're gonna think, okay, what's going on? Maybe the internet was just being whacked that moment. You'll try and log in a second time, and the second time is most likely going to go in because you are on the real website. And that's obviously going to raise less suspicion. Meanwhile, the first time you logged in, they actually captured your details, which is why it's called farming. Now this, guys, is also done often by using redirection by DNS spoofing, just in case you guys didn't know. Alright, folks, and then I'm going to take you on to one of the last topics in this video. It's not the last topic quite yet. It is something called typosquatting. Yes, I kid you not, there's an actual term out there called typosquatting. It's an actual thing. Feel free to go and look it up. Now, typosquatting makes phishing messages more convincing. Now, what typosquatting also is, guys, is when these threat actors, these bad guys or hackers, they will go and register a domain that looks very convincing. It looks like a real, legitimate domain that you guys know and are familiar with. For example, I am BurningIceTech, and my domain is BurningIceTech.com. Now, these perpetrators might go and register a domain that's called BurningIceTechs. Instead of tech at the back, there'll be an S at the back, techs. Anything similar to the real domain. Now, if someone doesn't pay attention, they might not notice this. This can be someone that's even an IT, for crying out loud. Some people just don't pay attention. They might not have noticed one letter in the domain has changed. And that one letter, guys, can make a huge difference. So this might seem like the real website, but it's not. There's a one-letter difference. You are on a fake website that may or may not be a farming website. The same can be said about emails. I can send you an email that looks like it's from my domain. By the way, my email address for this company is info@burningicetech.com. Now, if you see an email coming from that same email address, except it doesn't say burningicetech.com, there's maybe an S behind the tech once again. That's also called typosquatting, folks. It's not really from me. It is someone has registered the domain that looks like it's from me, and that is to try and trick you into giving them information or anything like that. So it's generally to try and be very convincing in terms of email addresses, websites, that kind of stuff. They will normally go and register the domain, and they will go and use this in terms of websites and email addresses. So this is a form of email spoofing technique, and you need to make sure you look at the from field. It confuses people. It's not an IT, but you guys will obviously know what it's about. It unfortunately causes confusion because now these folks, they don't know. Is this real? Is it not real? Does this entity have multiple domains? Because some well-known entities do legitimately have more than one well-known domain. They might have one that's got an S at the back and one that does not have an S at the back. We don't know. Is it real? Is it not? It causes confusion. If you're not sure, do some research. Now, typosquatting, guys, is cousin domains that look like a trusted domain. That's another term for it. So typosquatting could be referred to as cousin domains. It could be referred to as doppelgangers, or it could even be referred to as counterfeiters. Oh, there's so many names, guys. There is many creative names. I'm sure if you go run a search for it online, you'll find lots of extra names that I didn't even mention here. So if you find something that I didn't know about, feel free to mention it in the comment section down below. I would love to hear what these other names are as well. And then, folks, on that note, if you've ever had this happen to you, if you ever had an email being sent to you where they were pretending to be someone they're not, let us know in the comment section down below. Or if you visit a website, I think these are quite rare. Emails are not that rare, but websites that pretend to be one website when they're actually not. If you ever had that happen, or if you had a client or a user that had happened to, let us know down below. Tell us the story. We would love to hear about it. Alright, folks, and then moving on finally to the last topic of this module. I know this video is like more than twice as long as the first module. Unfortunately, this module just has a lot of topics, so I underestimated this module in terms of how long it was going to take to make. So I apologize for the delay for this video going live. But I do need to make sure I cover all the topics, because if I don't cover all the topics, you guys might potentially get asked about it in the exam, and then you're not going to know what the answer is. So my job is to cover all the topics, make sure you understand it, so that if and when you get questions about it in the exam, you will hopefully be able to answer them. And if you guys feel this is a lot of information, if you would like to maybe go back to another topic, if you want to go and revise on a topic, there's of course timestamps in the video description down below, folks. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to the last topic. Business email compromise. Right, folks, so with business email compromise, instead of just compromising random people's email addresses and hoping for some person to bite this bait of mine, so to speak, with business email compromise, you'll find that the perpetrator, this threat actor, will often go after a specific individual. This specific individual will normally be someone quite high up, an executive, a partner, someone very high up in a company on the corporate ladder normally. So someone very high up, a vendor, partner, executive, something of that nature. And they're going to target this individual by maybe using phishing, vishing, or one of those other kinds of attacks. And once they've compromised this person, they will pretend to be that person. Yes, I kid you not. They will most often pretend to be this executive, this partner, this vendor. So when they go and pretend to be this person, they are going to contact people in that company more than likely, and they will pretend to be that person. They will pose as a colleague. They will pose as a business partner or as a vendor. And this is to further compromise other people's accounts or to compromise some sort of information or a server in that company. But it all starts with a very high individual in the company in most cases. They compromise that person's account, or at the very least just pretend to be that person. They might just outright spoof their email address. Maybe they never even compromised the person's account. They just outright spoof this individual's email account, send a mail as if they are this person, or contact you as if they are this person. And if it's a very huge company that's got hundreds or thousands of users, they might not necessarily know what this person's voice sounds like if they call you, or what this person looks like. So if it's a video conference, they'll be inclined to believe this person if they say they are who they say they are. So if I tell you, hey, I am the following executive, or hey, I am the following partner or vendor, the average user in the average company, they might be inclined to believe that. Because the average person that's down the ladder, they don't know necessarily what these people look like. They don't necessarily know what these people sound like. So if I phone you, or I do a video conference with you, or I just send you a plain old email, which is the more likely one, you're not going to know if it's real or not, because you don't even know what I look like, sound like, or anything for that matter. So yeah, they will often pose as these individuals. Now with regarding this, they will do something called spear phishing. That is when we target someone specifically with phishing. So I'm not just doing a random phishing attack with random bait and hoping someone bites this bait of mine. No, spear phishing is when I'm specifically targeting a specific individual in a company, like an executive. But spear phishing is sometimes also used for other kinds of attacks. I mean, I've seen spear phishing often used for IT accounts, because us IT individuals, we've got privilege, much higher privilege than the average individual. So they might be targeting your account as an IT individual because you've got privilege. Then we've got whaling, which is just going after a high individual, once again, executive partner, someone like that. You've got CEO fraud or angler phishing as well. Then, folks, you get brand impersonation and disinformation. So that's usually to give a competitor an advantage. I'm not saying that's the reason why this will happen, but the more likely reason why this will happen is a competitor has got their knife in for you. You might be doing better than them, or they just want to eliminate the competition. So they will try and impersonate your brand because they want to steal your audience, or they will try and give disinformation to hopefully give you a disadvantage of some kind. You know, they want to give you a bad name so that they can steal your business. So this is generally done via making convincing fake phishing messages, business correspondence, and farming websites. So these farming websites might look like your websites, but they're not. And they're going to steal your clients or users' details, and that's at the end of the day going to give your company a very bad rap. Lastly, folks, you get something called a watering hole attack. Not something I see often, but I am mentioning it because I'm pretty sure they might ask you about this in the exam. So just because I think they might ask you this in the exam, that's why I'm mentioning it. So watering hole attack, feel free to go and read up more about this if you guys want to. That is to compromise a third-party site that the threat actor knows is used by the target. So if they know your company is using a third-party company for whatever purpose, for communications, heck, this can be to go and buy pizza for all we know. If they know what third parties you're using for whatever, they can use that information to their advantage to get other information about you or to compromise something. These hackers or these perpetrators, folks, are very creative. You wouldn't believe how creative they can sometimes be. Alrighty, folks, we have finally reached the end of this module. I hope you guys have learned something. I really do. You wouldn't believe how much sweat I've got, that's going down my cheek here from talking so much in one go. I'm really tired. I'm out of breath. I'm going to go and drink something after this video now. So guys, if you've learned something, feel free to mention that in the comment section down below. It's always cool to see that you guys learned something and what that might be. So if there's something you did not know, something you appreciate, let me know down in the comment section down below what you've learned. Obviously, stay tuned for module 3 of this course. And then, of course, guys, remember to like this video if you've not done so. I do put a lot of time and effort into this video. This is like 2.5 hours almost, for crying out loud. So I do put a lot of effort into these videos, guys. So yeah, give the video a like. If you'd like to know when module 3 goes live, maybe consider subscribing as well. And then a thank you, like usual, to all the supporters and sponsors of this channel, guys. Thank you very much. If you would like to support or sponsor the channel, you can find that information in the video description down below. Thank you very much to all the guys that clicked on the thanks button below the video, if it's available in your country. Those of you just buying a coffee or a milkshake, that link is in the description down below. I think it's like $3. And then, of course, the PayPal donations. So all of you guys making PayPal donations, there's a list of the guys. Thank you very much for making those donations on PayPal. And then, of course, the Patreons. Oh my goodness, the Patreons. So the list has gotten quite long, guys. But in reality, I think at this point in time, there's like over 500 Patreons. And this list is not nearly 500. It's just most of the guys prefer to stay anonymous. So normally if you become a Patreon, I will contact you via DM. I'll ask you if you would like to have your name listed. And if so, what name you want to have listed. So you guys can actually choose what name you want to have listed in the videos. It's not necessarily going to be whatever name you've got on Patreon. I'll ask you, what name do you want to have listed if you want to be listed? And that's on all the tiers. It doesn't matter, even if you take the cheapest tier, not the free one, but all the paid tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, all of them you can have your name on the video, should you want to have it on the video. Alright, folks, and then the very last thing I'll mention before we call this a video. For those of you that don't know yet, the channel does have a Discord server. Link is in the video description down below. It's literally at the very bottom of the video description. Check it out. There's over 2,000 people the last time I checked in that server. I'm in there. Other IG trainers are in there. Lots of people studying this course as well as other courses are in there. So if you'd like assistance of some kind, you can ask your questions there. If you'd like to assist other people, or if you just want a community of like-minded people, all of that can be found in that server. Alright guys, I will see you in the next video, which is Module 3 of Security Plus.